Hello friends, welcome to FDR India. Let's discuss a recent development about pension systems and India's fiscal prudence with Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan today. Hello sir.
Hello, Ankit.
Sir, a couple of days back, Union government has approved a new scheme. It's called a unified pension scheme for government employees. Now, it has been touted as a middle way between the old pension system, OPS, and the currently in existing national pension system, NPS. Be that as it may, is this the right way forward?
Now, in order to understand this, Ankit, we must understand what this old pension system is
Right.
and what is OPS
Right.
and what the national pension system NPS is. Now, world over, we have some kind of a social security or some kind of a pension system for the employees after retirement. The difference is all over the world, they have for all the workers, public sector, private sector, high wage, low wage, everybody. For instance, in the US, 94% of the population, or the working population, is covered by some kind of a pension system. In Britain and all European countries like France, Sweden, other countries, 100%. Practically all workers are covered. In India, the pension system is available only to government employees.
Right.
And government employees constitute 3.2% of the total workforce of India. First, we must understand what it means. While the rest of the world, the developed world and civilized world, has a pension system for all the workers, in India, only the privileged few in government, 3.2%, have pension system. The second thing is, what is the old pension system, OPS, in India? It is called pay as you go. That means you pay salaries. Already employee salaries in India are much higher than the market wages. 3 to 4 times higher than the market wages. Whereas rest of the world, nowhere do you have the government paying 3 to 4 times the market wages for the same work. Sometimes 5-10% more, very often actually 10-20% less than the market. And that apart, there is no monthly contribution to a pension fund. That means you pay salaries now, and salaries keep increasing. With the price increase, there is dearness allowance. It's called price indexation or inflation indexation. Then every few years, we have what are called pay revision commissions. They are increasing the salaries dramatically, very considerable, by 50%, 70%, 80%, 100% gross each time. So, for employees, you pay the salaries now, and once they retire at the age of 58 initially, now in most states and in the country 60 years, whatever be the retirement age, for the rest of the life, for them, and then the family pension after the employee dies, 50% of the last monthly wage, 50% of the last monthly wage, apart from many other benefits, I don't want to go into details, that is payable until the employee's death, and once employee dies, to whoever is eligible for a family pension, employee's widow, minor children, etc., etc. And this amount is increasing because as salary goes up, the pension burden also is increasing. So much so, people who retired with 10,000 rupees salary at the end, there are cases where they get 60,000 rupees pension. So the pension burden has gone up dramatically. For instance, you take the union government, in just about 10 years, from 2012 to 2022, in just about 12 years, or 10 years, the pension burden has gone up threefold. Whereas in states, in just about 18 years, from 2004 to 2022, 18 years, pension burden has gone up 11 times. You can imagine what's happening. 3 to 4 times in 10 years, 11 times in 18 years. So it's mounting dramatically. So much so, we are paying this pension without any pension fund. There is no contribution earlier by the employer or the government. So where is this pension money coming from? From the tax money, from the budget. How much is it? It is 18.2% of the total revenues of the governments, union and states. Just imagine. One, there is no funding of the pension earlier. There's no fund available. You're drawing from the treasury, from the exchequer. That means you are paying from your taxes pensions for people who served me or my parents. Your generation is paying for the earlier generation's services from the tax money. And it's not a small amount. It is 18.2% of the total revenues of the governments in India for only 3.2% of the workers. And it's growing dramatically. As I explained to you, 11 times in 18 years for the states and about 3 times in about 9-10 years for the union. It's growing dramatically. So what happens? After some time, it's no longer possible. The governments are going to collapse on the weight of the salary burden. Anyway, we have to pay. And the pension burden, which is increasing so fast, it's exceeding the salaries. After some time, it will go beyond the salary amount. That is the context. The OPS is not sustainable. Therefore, in 2004, the government introduced what is called National Pension System, NPS. What is NPS? To make this pension burden sustainable. How do you make it sustainable? You make sure that along with the salary, the employee and the government, they put away some money for the future pensions. That means the pensions are not going to be drawn after these people retire from the tax money. That means your children will not pay taxes to bear the pension cost for the services you and I receive. That's what the rest of the world does. America, Britain, Germany, Japan, France, practically every significant economy does it that way. It's called contributory pension. So the national pension system is a contributory pension. A certain percentage of the employee's salary, in this case 10%, and the government of India 14%, states, depending on the states, 10 or 14%, they were paying. This is applicable for all the employees who joined from 1st of January 2004. The people who were recruited earlier, because they were recruited on those terms, they get pension on the old pension basis without contribution. The country has to bear the consequences. And the second is the money that accrues, the money government puts in, employer, the money employee puts in, it all goes to an independent pension fund. Government has no control over it. That money is managed, it's invested. Invested in stock, invested in deposits, invested in bonds, whatever, it's invested. And money keeps growing. For instance, you put money in a bank or in the stock or in the bonds, money keeps growing. So your money is growing in your account. From that money, the income that is derived after your retirement will go as an annuity. That goes as your pension.
Right.
The good part of it is there is no burden on the future generation taxpayers. The government is not going to go bankrupt. But the difficult part of it is how much money will go tomorrow, we don't know. Because you are investing. Now, how much money you will get back as income, return on investment, you are not sure, right? It depends on conditions beyond your control. Sometimes the stock market goes up very well. Last 1 or 2 years, it's gone up dramatically.
Right.
Sometimes it may stagnate. Sometimes it may actually fall. Sometimes it may crash. In 1929, America and much of the developed world, stock market crashed. That was the Great Depression. For about 10 years, until the Second World War, the world was in turmoil. So if that happens, all your savings are gone. Because you put the savings, good faith, they're all in stock, the stock value has plummeted, and you have no money left. So anything is possible. You may get more, you may get less. So employees are agitating that we want assured pension. Now, that's where the UPS comes in.
Right.
What the government of India has done is, they said, all right, the contributions will continue. Government will now contribute a little more. Why? To ensure that you get the pension exactly as much as you're getting under the OPS. 50% of the last drawn salary, family pension if the employee dies in retirement, then minimum pension of 10,000 rupees if you have served at least for 10 years. So, and then some gratuity, at the time of retirement you get some lump sum, etc. But if this is not coming as a return on the investment made or return on the fund, somebody has to bear that. Who will bear that? The taxpayer.
Right.
So there also what the government did is something very wise. Earlier the government was paying 14% monthly contribution on the salary. Now they calculated it may require more money to guarantee this amount of pension. Therefore, we'll put not 14% but 18.5%. They increased the amount to 18.5. So basically, this UPS is a marriage between the NPS system where contributory pension is there so that the future generation will not bear the burden. At the same time, guaranteeing a certain benefits, assured benefits, irrespective of what happens in the stock market, irrespective of the fund management. That means the government is now taking the responsibility, guaranteeing it. So it has both the features of defined benefits, assured benefits. You know exactly what you're going to get. At least you may get more. If your fund is managed better, you get more income, you may get more. But you'll at least get this much, no matter what happens. But there will be contributory pension. The employer and the government will contribute so that the future generation is not burdened. So UPS, therefore, is a very good measure. Though it adds to the government expenditure to give the satisfaction and certainty to employees in terms of social security after retirement, it does not burden the next generation. And it's necessary and welcome. Why it's necessary is some states unwisely, some political parties somewhat unwisely have been offering old pension system which is non-contributory system. That means the future generation is burdened, the government will go bankrupt. Now UPS is a via media, as you said rightly, where the government in future will not go bankrupt. You are funding the money today for future expenditure. Therefore, whatever expenditure there, you are transparently showing it in the budget. And you are creating a separate fund. And therefore, the future obligations can be met satisfactorily. It will protect the growth of the future. It will protect our children. Now, a family will not borrow at the cost of the future.
Right.
A family will not burden the next generation with the cost they have incurred. If I incur the cost, I must spend the money. You must not spend the money as the next generation. The same principle government is adopted. Contribution today for what you have incurred today, for the benefits you got today, so that the next generation, the children, are not burdened with the past liabilities.
Right.
So that is assured. At the same time, the employees are given the satisfaction that there is an assured, very comfortable, generous pension system after retirement. So it's a good compromise, and the states must embrace that. Now it applies to union government.
Right. So, but you also said that world over in other countries, there's a fully contributory system, and it covers not just the government employees, but also those who are not in the government employees.
Exactly.
So, with UPS, are we comparable to the other countries?
No, UPS is only for government employees.
Right.
Now, the NPS, the National Pension System, the contributory system created in 2004 by Vajpayee government and continued by Manmohan Singh government very aggressively and spread across the whole country except West Bengal. The NPS ensures that not only government employees, but on a voluntary basis, any company, any individual employer and employee, they can now join the NPS. So people slowly are joining because there is no compulsion. But for government, it is mandatory, NPS or UPS. Government is making the contributions. But private sector, slowly it is expanding. Right now, probably outside government, a small number has joined because, all of India probably has only about 6 or 7 crore organized workers. Only about 10 or 12% of the workforce of India is organized workforce. In government, we have about 18 million, 1.8 crores or so. They constitute about 3.2% of the workforce. Probably another 2 or 3% might have joined now. So slowly that number is increasing, but the system is open. We have not created a universal pension system. Only for the poor, for the truly poor, the government is giving free pensions. No, that is 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. Government of India is giving some money, states are adding. Depending on the state, they are giving some amount. Typically, it is about 2,000 rupees in most states, maybe 1,500 also in many states. Some states have gone to 3,000. Some states now, I think in Andhra Pradesh recently has gone up to 4,000 per month. But this is completely a social welfare program, nothing to do with pension contribution or anything. It just goes out of the budget.
So all of this is only impacting the 3.2% of the population?
And they are taking away 18.2% of the total government revenues right now. Because remember, This NPS, UPS, when will it actually come into effect? While they're already started drawing the money from the government exchequer, the employer and the employee. Until about 2035 or so, the people who have been recruited from 2004 would not retire. So only as those people retire, the new employees from 2004 as they retire, only then will the pension be drawn from the pension fund. Whereas right now, until 2034, 35 or thereabouts, all the pension is disbursed from the exchequer, from the government kitty, from the treasury. After 2030 or 35, what will happen is, slowly, more and more retired employees will be coming from post-2004 generation. So that burden will no longer be in the exchequer. But the past burden will be there.
Right.
You just take, let's say, 24 or 25 years as an average age of recruitment. That means the people recruited in 2003, they would have been, let's say, 24 or 25. They retire, let's say, at 60 years of age. That means they're going to retire. Some may retire a little early, some may retire a year or two later, but on an average, I'm saying, let's say 35 years. That means 2058. But they will live for the next 25, 30 years.
Right.
So that means until about 2004, I said.
Yes.
So add another 35 years, 2039. So add another 20, 25 years, life after retirement. So that means about 2060 or so, you no longer will have to pay from the treasury.
Right.
So as of now, until 2060 or thereabout, you will continue to pay from the budget for the pensions of the people who are recruited before 2004. After 2058 or 2060, around that period, almost all the pension money will come out of the pension fund. But even there, government is now assuming certain responsibility. Supposing that's not enough, we will draw from the treasury. That's okay. That's a risk we can take. So it's a necessary thing. There's no other viable program because India cannot continue to pay pensions from the treasury. That means the future generations are finished. India will become a Venezuela or a Sri Lanka or a Zimbabwe. Governments will collapse. Right now, even to pay salaries, pensions and interest and debt and the welfare programs, all this is current expenditure. You're not building assets for the future. You're not building property for the next generation. You're not increasing growth. These are exceeding your total revenues of the government. You're borrowing now to spend on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
You're not investing for the future already. It's a very considerable amount of borrowing. Some states are now on the verge of bankruptcy even now, even at this point in time. After 10, 15 years, if this continues, they simply are finished. Take Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh, the government itself recently announced, new government, that the total liabilities, the total debt as of now, including the unpaid bills, it's not shown as debt, but the bills have to be paid. There's no choice because legally you're obliged to pay. You already got the contracted work done or supplies were given to you, you have to pay. By not paying, your tens of thousands of small entrepreneurs, they're all seriously affected. They're on the verge of bankruptcy. You have to pay them. Now, including all that, it is coming to 9.72 lakh crores.
Will
That
the numbers
is 68% of the GSDP of the state. The state's debt cannot exceed about 20%, maybe 30% will go, but now it comes to 68%, the highest in India. You cannot afford it.
will the numbers be similar for other states as well?
Andhra Pradesh, as of now, from these numbers, is probably in the most difficult situation. But there are many states, Punjab, Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, West Bengal, to some extent Kerala. But particularly these four states I mentioned, they are all in this boat of 50% or 55%, the GSDP being the debt burden.
So, and these are the states that had gone back to the old pension scheme last year.
Exactly. That's a paradox, among all this, the government of India gave an incentive.
Right.
Whether it's the NDA government of Vajpayee or UPA government of Manmohan Singh, they acted together. There was continuity. There was a time when in India, parties acted in the interest of the country. There was a consensus. Today, that consensus is broken down. If you're in power, I'll oppose everything you do. If I'm in power, you'll oppose everything I do. It's a tragedy for the country. Let me be very truthful. But there was a time when there was a consensus among parties and governments, and there was continuity of policy. So while Vajpayee government started this National Pension System, NPS, Mr. Yashwant Sinha was the finance minister at that time. The UPA government of Dr. Manmohan Singh continued that vigorously, gave an incentive to state governments. They said, if you embrace NPS in interest of the future of your state, we will give some concessions on debts. Earlier debts are forgiven, some concessions, incentives are given. All states embraced except one state, West Bengal.
Right.
They were under Marxist control at that time. Very unwisely, they did not opt for the NPS. Now, West Bengal is going to pay a very heavy price, I guarantee you. It will happen after 20 years, after 25 years, but it will be a disaster. It will be a fiscal collapse. All other states embraced it. From 2004 onwards, they are now, for the new employees, they are putting away money in a pension fund. The employees' contribution 10% and employers, the government's contribution. So pension fund is now built up. While they continue to draw money from the treasury for the pensions, because right now the retired people who are drawing pension are people who were recruited well before 2004.
Right.
But as I said before, to go on for another 15 years or 10, 15 years, after that, slowly, the burden will come down. We have to bear this burden for 10 years. Now, that's a very happy thing. But what happened? Parties have become very, very scared of elections. They're completely ignoring the future. They only want to get power at any cost. After all, the problem is going to be 15 years later.
Right.
Who cares about 15 years? Getting into power today is the issue. So parties, unwisely, many non-BJP parties have started offering reversion to old pension system, a disaster, state after state. So in the process, Himachal Pradesh, Punjab, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, they all opted for the old pension system.
I believe not Madhya Pradesh.
Madhya Pradesh has opted, but in operationalization there is some delay.
Okay.
The Congress governments earlier. Now, when BJP came back to power in Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh and Rajasthan, they are trying to revert back now. I don't know the exact state of the process, but they are now trying to go back. They are in varying stages. And in Andhra Pradesh, in Telangana and Karnataka, Congress party promised to go back to OPS again very unwisely.
Right.
But luckily, the elected governments of Congress party in these two states have been wise after getting elected. They are maintaining a discreet silence. So they are not allowing things to go out of control. Otherwise, they will be doomed in future. So that is the context in which we are. And Andhra Pradesh has done something very sensible. They have done something very similar to UPS now. In the last government, they brought in a guaranteed pension scheme, very much similar. There's a contributory element, but you're guaranteeing a certain amount of pension, so there's certainty, you know exactly what you're going to get. So that's where we are in the country. Now the states must embrace this. Otherwise, there is simply no future. As I told you about Andhra Pradesh as an example, with 68% of the GSDP as the debt, this year the government showed that the interest payment alone is about 72,000 crores. That is not calculating the liabilities on account of unpaid bills. The interest and debt alone, official debt alone, is probably about 72,000 crores. Now, to maintain the budget this year, they have to borrow, the expenditure that they have to incur, on which they have no control, they have to borrow, I believe, from what they showed in the figures, about 94,000 crores. Borrowings and still a further deficit they are saying we don't know how to meet. That is excluding 1,30,000 crores unpaid bills. That means basically we are in a bankrupt situation because there is no solution to this. Because you cannot borrow recklessly. There is no end to this. State cannot borrow as it pleases. It is the responsibility of the union government to make sure that the overall borrowings are under control and the future finances of the country are safe. Otherwise, India will become a Venezuela. India will become a Sri Lanka. India will become a Zimbabwe. We are finished. No economic growth, tremendous price rise, mass unrest, mass poverty, mass shortages, no money for imports, we'll be in a disaster zone. So we are on the verge of that in some states. And we have to now address those challenges.
So we already have a couple of states that have a poor, a very high liability as a percentage of GDP ratio, and on top of that, their decision to go back to old pension system. So my question to you is, who pays for states' poor finances?
See, just like the union, state also collects revenues. States are its own taxes under the constitution. In addition to that, union gives a very hefty amount for states' resources. A large part of it is the union tax revenues. There is a share given to the states. There is some other money given in order for the states to implement what are called centrally sponsored schemes. State and the union, they both share the expenditure there. If you take all kinds of transfers to states from the union, this year, for instance, 23.7 lakh crores, 23.7 lakh crores is coming to the states from the union, from the union's budget, in addition to all the states' revenues. So the states actually are spending more money than the union because a lot of money is coming from the union. Now, when I say the states are forced to borrow for day-to-day expenditure, it is after receiving the money from the union and after taking into account the total revenues of the state, they are forced to borrow for the day-to-day expenditure. Not for investment into the future, not for roads, not for projects, not for power plants, not for school buildings. No, it is to meet salaries, pensions, interest and debt, and welfare programs only. So that's a perilous situation. And some states are simply not capable of handling it any longer. Andhra Pradesh today, in my judgment, if the numbers given by the government are right, there is a deep, deep, deep crisis. Not of the making of this government, it's a cumulative problem. But today, the government is faced with extraordinary challenge. And when that happens, the union government is the custodian of the public finances of India. While we, for convenience, talk about union and the states, there's only one general government debt.
Right.
And general government revenues. Because for the world, the government in India is only one. They don't care whether it's a Hyderabad city or Telangana state or Indian Union. The government is one. And if the government itself is bankrupt, then all investment will stop, the creditors will demand repayment promptly, and all economic activity will cease. We will be in deep crisis. Therefore, to prevent that, the constitution makers, Dr. Ambedkar and his colleagues, they made certain provisions. It is the government of India's responsibility, union government's responsibility, to make sure that the states do not go bankrupt. Because if the states go bankrupt, the country goes bankrupt. In India, a state cannot separately go bankrupt. In America, there's a system where the state can go bankrupt. The state is finished. What they do with themselves is their problem. They can shut down the government, they can stop paying salaries, they can do whatever, because there's no choice. There's no money available. Whereas in India, that's not allowed, quite rightly. The union is the custodian of the public finances of India. Union is the guarantor of the financial stability of India. Union is the guarantor of the credit of India. If the union fails in that, that means Indian credit collapses, India has no financial stability, India has the deepest possible crisis. So the union is given that responsibility. How? They have to approve every borrowing of the state. Now, union over the years has been somewhat lax about it. They have been somewhat generous. Now, we cannot afford to be like that because your generosity is at the cost of the next generation. We must now tighten those provisions, uniformly applicable to the whole country, but you cannot allow states to spend as they please and then borrow as they please, because the union's responsibility. You must impose conditions, you must be very tight about borrowings. The second is, if things go out of control, the union has an obligation to impose what is called financial emergency. Under Article 360, financial emergency is imposed. What happens then? All the expenditure decisions will then go to union government. The state has no control over expenditure. And then some extraordinary decisions can be taken by the president depending on the need. Because now an emergency, life or death situation. Therefore, the president can order that the salaries and the pensions of employees can be cut. Extraordinarily drastic decisions become necessary. The union government has the duty to take those decisions. Otherwise, what else it means? When your expenditure far exceeds your income, when there's no source of income, you cannot borrow above a certain level because the credit of India and the state is seriously affected. Then what is the choice? You have to curb expenditure. You have to shut down the government, so to speak. That's what happens in let's say, in American states. You shut down the government. A city can go bankrupt, a state can go bankrupt. So now, those extraordinary provisions come into operation. It was never implemented in India, but I suspect now some states are very close to that, if they're not already there. And some very tough decisions will have to be taken to protect the future of the state and the country.
So like you said, in the Unified Pension Scheme, the UPS, government's contribution has been increased from 14% to 18.5%.
Correct.
But employees has remained the same at
Same
10%.
10%.
What are your thoughts on that?
Additional burden the government is bearing. No, in India, governments are very generous with the government employees.
Right.
First of all, government employees get, on an average, 2 to 3 times or 4 times the salary of the market for most of the jobs. For the same job you do in private sector, suppose you get 20,000 rupees. In government, typically they're paid 60,000 rupees or 70,000 rupees, generally. Similarly, pension, I'll just give you a comparison. Take United States. The average pension from the pension system they have, we discussed it. Practically all workers, 94% of the workers are covered. The average pension is equal to 25% of the per capita income. America today has about $72,000 or so per capita income. That means $18,000 is the pension per retired person on an average. Britain, the average pension is 23% of the per capita income.
Right.
It was 8,700 pounds on an average in 2021, 2020 or so. Now it may be a little higher, maybe 9,000 pounds, or I don't know exact amount of that order. That comes to about 23% of the per capita income. India, government employees' pension is about 5,40,000 rupees per year. That makes it more than 2.5 times that of per capita income of the country. So government is very generous employer, the world's most generous employer in a desperately poor country. So in keeping with that, while they want to make sure that the burden on the future generation is not there, that is a perfectly necessary thing. Otherwise, as we discussed, there's no future left for the country. They wanted to make sure that much of the burden on account of this decision, the new burden, is borne by the government. Already even earlier, if the employee was paying 10%, government is paying 14%. Now they said, already we'll increase it further. That means now it's become almost 2 to 1. The employer, the government, that means the taxpayer of India is bearing twice the burden of the employee for the employee's future pensions. Anyway, they're bearing 100% of the employee's salary, that's necessary. So it's a generous provision. It's okay as long as the money is provided today, not burdened in the next generation. Then obviously expenditure will go up. To that extent, you cannot spend more money for welfare. You cannot spend more money for future investments, for economic growth. But that's the price we have to pay as a country. See, in a democracy, there is always a clash between the long-term good that you have to promote and the short-term difficulties you encounter. Unfortunately, oftentimes the short-term political calculations, they dominate at the cost of the long-term good. Occasionally, a Vajpayee or a Manmohan Singh look at the long-term good and they prepare the country for short-term price.
Right.
Okay, very often, governments in their quest for short-term power, they ignore the long-term good, they undermine the long-term good, and they give short-term benefits. Now, UPS is a method to try to reconcile these two in a sensible manner. And it's necessary. Some such efforts are necessary because you cannot ask the employees to pay a very heavy price when they're used to certain level of advantage compared to the rest of the people. But you have to make sure that it's sustainable. Therefore, you must protect the long term while you carry the people with you. It is one such effort.
Right. My last question to you, sir. With the coming of UPS, what are your expectations from those sections of society that demanded the OPS?
No, it's a wonderful deal. They should be delighted that Indian government and Indian people are so generous to 3.2% of the population, whose pension burden alone is taking away 18.2% of the total revenues of the governments in the country. Now, if public servants understand the public finances, they should be delighted because this is a deal which no other country in the world offered, no major economy in the world offered. This is the best deal in the world among large economies. They should be delighted. It's a great victory for employees. If they ask for more, then the people of India will have to be educated about what is happening, that it is at their cost. When in the rest of the world, take America for instance, 94% of the people are getting pension. While the pension fund is separate, as a share of the total government revenues, the pension fund expenditure every year is under 15%, 14.79%. But almost all the workers are getting. Britain, 100% of the workers are getting pension. The share of the total government revenues is 12.6%. India, 3.2% of the workers are getting the pension benefit. The burden on the revenues is 18.2%. You can understand how generous Indian people have been in respect to government employees. Now, if you want more, then India cannot afford it. Already Indian people are overpaying. Enormous mass poverty is there. Outside of government, 80% of the workers, more than 80% of the workers are in the organized sector. They have precarious lives, marginal incomes. So every rupee that comes out of the taxpayers' money comes from the poorest of the poor in India. Now, employees of government come from our society. They understand the society's compulsions. Of course, each of us wants something for ourselves. There's nothing wrong. But it must be sustainable. It must be fair. And we are all here to take care that the poverty is eliminated, prosperity goes up. If you take away the bulk of the money for your benefit at the cost of the poor of India, at the cost of causing mass poverty and misery to people, that's not fair, and people of India will not tolerate it.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your perspectives. Thank you.